Hi everyone. This is not just a story, it is a mirror held up to years of quiet suffering, buried strength, and a truth so sharp it cut through lies that once felt permanent. Before this journey unfolds, take a moment to support the stories that give voice to the unheard. Like, subscribe, and stay connected because what you are about to witness is not weakness turning into rage, but silence transforming into power. Welcome to Black Queen Dominion. The story began long before the test, before the accusation, before the word useless settled into her bones like a curse she could not wash off. It began with hope, the kind of hope that feels soft and warm at first, the kind that promises safety when you believe love alone is enough to carry two people forward. She had entered marriage believing in partnership, believing that patience would be rewarded, believing that time would heal all questions left unanswered. Instead, time sharpened them. Years passed, measured not by anniversaries or celebrations, but by appointments, tests, whispered reassurances from doctors, and long nights staring at ceilings while doubt grew heavier than sleep. The absence of children became the centerpiece of everything, the unspoken third presence in the marriage that crowded every room. What once had been shared dreams turned into quiet blame that never fully spoke its name but lingered everywhere. The emotional abuse did not arrive loudly. It crept in disguised as concern, masked as disappointment, framed as honesty. Her value slowly became tied to what her body could not produce, and each passing month was treated like evidence of her failure. She began to shrink herself to survive the days, apologizing for things she could not control, absorbing responsibility for a problem that was never fully understood. Her husband's words became sharper with time, though never in public. To the world, he remained patient, long-suffering, admired for standing by a wife who could not give him children. Behind closed doors, the weight of his resentment pressed against her chest until breathing felt like effort. The word useless echoed in her mind even when he was not near. It followed her into kitchens, into beds, into mirrors where she no longer recognized the woman staring back. So she tried. She tried with diets, schedules, faith, silence, and endurance. She tried by believing that love meant staying even when it hurt. Each compromise chipped away at her confidence, but she convinced herself this was what loyalty looked like. She did not know yet that loyalty without truth is only self-betrayal. The demand for a DNA test arrived not as a request, but as a verdict already decided in his mind. It was framed as proof, as closure, as the final step to explain their childlessness. He insisted it was necessary, insisting that all doubts be erased. In that moment she felt something fracture inside her, not because of fear of results, but because of what the demand represented. Trust had been replaced by suspicion, partnership replaced by accusation. Agreeing to the test felt like surrender but also like relief. Deep down, something told her the truth was bigger than the insult wrapped around the demand. She walked into the clinic carrying years of shame that never belonged to her, and for the first time she did not feel afraid of the answer. The test became a symbol not of doubt but of reckoning. While waiting for results, life continued its quiet cruelty. The house felt colder, conversations thinner, affection non-existent. She moved through days like a shadow of herself, replaying every memory, wondering when love had turned into leverage. Yet beneath the exhaustion a strange calm began to grow. A sense that something was about to shift whether she was ready or not. When the results arrived they did not explode immediately. They sat sealed, heavy with implication. Holding that envelope she felt the years of blame pressing against it, begging to be released. She did not open it right away. She allowed herself one moment to breathe, to acknowledge that whatever lay inside could change everything she thought she knew. That night as she lay awake she realized something profound. Even before the truth was confirmed she felt lighter. The certainty that she was not broken began to surface, faint but persistent. The test was no longer about proving herself. It was about exposing a lie that had shaped her entire reality. The chapter closed not with answers but with anticipation. The truth was finally within reach, and for the first time in years she felt ready to face it. The silence before revelation carried more power than all the accusations that came before. The morning arrived quietly as if the world itself was holding its breath. Sunlight filtered through curtains that had witnessed too many nights of unspoken pain. She moved with purpose now, not rushed, not hesitant, but grounded in a calm she did not fully understand yet. The envelope rested on the table unchanged, yet it carried the weight of years. This was not just paper and ink. It was the potential collapse of a carefully constructed lie. She thought back to the early days of her marriage, replaying moments she had once dismissed. The way conversations about children always circled back to her body. The way medical appointments were framed as her responsibility alone. The way his sympathy seemed rehearsed, conditional, fading whenever patience ran thin. Patterns began to emerge, no longer blurred by self-blame. Opening the results was not dramatic. There was no shaking hand, no sudden gasp. There was only stillness, followed by clarity so sharp it felt like cold water against skin. The truth revealed itself plainly, without cruelty, without emotion. The problem had never been hers. The years of humiliation, the accusations, the insults all pointed back to him. Biology did not lie even when people did. In that moment something irreversible happened. The narrative she had been forced to carry disintegrated. She was not defective. She was not the reason dreams collapsed. She had been made small to protect a secret that was never hers to keep. The realization did not bring instant joy. It brought grief for the years stolen, for the confidence eroded, for the love that had been poisoned by deception. She did not confront him immediately. Power, she realized, was not always loud. Sometimes it was quiet preparation. She needed time to understand not just the lie but the intention behind it. This was not a simple misunderstanding. This was a calculated shifting of blame, a slow erosion of her worth to shield his ego from exposure. As days passed, she observed him differently. Every complaint, every sigh, every look of disappointment revealed itself as performance. The man who once claimed victimhood was standing on a foundation of denial. Watching him now felt like seeing behind a curtain she had never known existed. She began reclaiming pieces of herself that had gone dormant. Simple things like choosing clothes without wondering if they looked maternal enough, or speaking without measuring how her words might provoke judgment. Strength returned quietly, building momentum beneath her skin. The test had not just exposed his secret. It had awakened her truth. The weight of confrontation loomed, but she refused to rush it. Revenge, she understood, was not about shouting or humiliation. It was about precision. About allowing the truth to arrive exactly where it would cause the deepest awakening. She prepared not with anger but with strategy. Her husband sensed the shift but misunderstood it. He mistook her calm for defeat, her silence for acceptance. That miscalculation would become his greatest mistake. He continued his narrative, unaware that it was already unraveling. When she finally looked at him, she no longer saw authority. She saw fear, fragile and hidden beneath layers of arrogance. The power dynamic had shifted, though he had not yet realized it. The test results rested safely away, waiting for their moment. The power of truth does not always announce itself with noise. Sometimes it waits, patient and deliberate, allowing the weight of realization to settle before it strikes. She entered this phase of her life with a new awareness, one that sharpened her perception and stripped away the fog that had clouded her judgment for years. Every memory she revisited now carried new meaning, and every interaction revealed layers she had once been too exhausted to see. She began to understand that emotional abuse thrives on repetition and isolation. His constant reminders of her supposed failure had not been accidental. They had been carefully cultivated to keep her dependent, uncertain, and quiet. By convincing her she was the problem, he had secured control without ever needing to raise his voice. That realization hurt, but it also ignited something fierce within her. Awareness became her armor. Days turned into a slow, intentional performance. She allowed life to appear unchanged on the surface, maintaining routines and responsibilities while internally dismantling the lies that had structured her world. Each chore, each shared meal, each mundane moment became an opportunity to reclaim her sense of self. She no longer internalized his dissatisfaction. Instead, she studied it. She noticed how often he referenced sacrifice, how frequently he framed himself as the one enduring hardship. His narrative relied on her silence, and now that silence had shifted purpose. It was no longer submission. It was observation. The more he spoke, the clearer the pattern became. He was protecting an identity built on false superiority, and the cracks were beginning to show. She sought knowledge quietly. She educated herself about emotional manipulation, about projection, about the ways people externalize their insecurities to avoid accountability. Each piece of information felt like reclaiming a stolen year of her life. She realized she had not been weak. She had been systematically worn down. And worn down did not mean broken. The house that once felt like a prison slowly transformed into neutral ground. She stopped trying to please. She stopped explaining herself. That absence of reaction unsettled him more than any argument ever had. Control thrives on response, and she was no longer providing it. The balance he relied on was shifting beneath his feet. At night, she reflected on the woman she used to be before marriage had narrowed her identity. She remembered ambition, laughter, confidence, and independence. Those qualities had never disappeared. They had simply been buried under years of blame. Now they resurfaced, cautious but resilient. The truth she held was heavy, but it did not crush her. Instead, it grounded her. She understood now that confrontation would not be enough. Simply exposing the secret would not heal the damage done. The reckoning needed to be deeper, more complete. She needed him to face not just the biological truth but the moral one. She prepared herself emotionally for what was to come. She imagined different outcomes, different reactions, but she no longer feared them. Whatever happened next would be rooted in reality, not illusion. That alone gave her strength. He grew increasingly restless. His dissatisfaction intensified, his tone sharper, his accusations more careless. He did not realize that every insult now documented itself in her memory, no longer as wounds but as evidence. The man who once made her doubt herself was unknowingly building the case against his own character. She understood that timing was everything. Truth delivered without preparation can be dismissed. Truth delivered at the right moment becomes undeniable. She waited for the moment when his certainty would be at its peak, when his confidence in his narrative would blind him completely. That would be the moment the truth would land hardest. The air in the house had grown tense, almost electric, a tension born not of argument but of anticipation. She moved through the rooms with calm precision, her steps measured, her presence deliberate. Every glance, every silence carried weight now, and he felt it even if he could not name it. He was still trapped in his narrative of superiority, convinced that the secrets he had protected so fiercely would never be revealed. What he did not realize was that the balance of power had already shifted, quietly but irrevocably. She began to subtly assert control over spaces he once dominated. She rearranged routines, took ownership of decisions, and approached her daily life with a sense of authority that had been dormant for years. He noticed the difference, but his arrogance prevented him from seeing the strategy behind it. He mistook her calm for weakness, her silence for fear. In truth, she was preparing for the reckoning with a patience that only someone who has suffered silently can possess. Every interaction became a study in human behavior. She observed how he deflected blame, how he twisted small truths, and how he projected guilt onto her without remorse. Patterns emerged, and with each pattern her resolve strengthened. She had spent years doubting herself, but the test had shattered that illusion. Now she saw him clearly, unfiltered by the excuses she had once believed. She knew the truth in her hands. The DNA test results were her ultimate weapon. They held not only the confirmation of his lies but also the power to rewrite the narrative he had controlled for so long. Yet she resisted using them recklessly. This was not about instant gratification. It was about the precise moment when exposure would yield maximum impact. Timing, she understood, was everything. As she prepared, she began reclaiming other parts of her life that had been neglected. Old ambitions resurfaced. Forgotten hobbies became outlets for strength. She reached out to friends and family who had once been distant, quietly rebuilding the support system she had lost under the weight of his manipulations. Each reconnection reinforced her confidence and reminded her that she was not alone. He, meanwhile, remained oblivious. He continued to assert control, issuing commands, framing dissatisfaction as concern, attempting to manipulate daily routines to maintain dominance. But she had already transcended the need for approval. His words no longer held the power to wound. They merely confirmed the lies he had lived. The turning point came subtly. A small slip, an accidental comment revealing a detail he had thought safely hidden, caught her attention. She recognized the significance immediately. The pieces were falling into place, and the story he had constructed over years was beginning to unravel under its own weight. Preparation was meticulous. She drafted a plan not for chaos but for clarity. The revelation needed to be undeniable, concrete, and unassailable. She would present the evidence in a way that left no room for denial, no space for gaslighting, no opportunity for him to twist reality back to his advantage. She also prepared herself emotionally. Revenge, she knew, was not merely about punishment. It was about justice, about reclaiming dignity, about demonstrating that truth can be more powerful than manipulation. She visualized the moment when the evidence would be laid bare, and she felt a calm satisfaction that replaced the fear that had once dominated her existence. The day arrived quietly, almost innocuously. He continued his routines, unaware that the moment of exposure was imminent. She carried herself with a composed authority, an invisible signal that the dynamic had shifted. Every glance he cast in her direction was met with an unyielding steadiness. The house, once a stage for his control, now felt like the arena of his reckoning. She began assembling the elements of her revelation. The test results were displayed with deliberate clarity, accompanied by the timeline of manipulation, deception, and lies he had built over the years. She did not need to raise her voice or resort to dramatics. The evidence spoke for itself, unflinching, undeniable. As he first glimpsed the truth, confusion and disbelief flickered across his face. For a moment, the man who had controlled narratives and twisted reality found himself confronted with an immutable fact he could not deny. He had relied on her silence to shield his secrets, and now that silence had transformed into a weapon of exposure. The chapter concluded with the transformation fully realized. She was no longer the woman subjected to manipulation, doubt, and control. She had reclaimed her power, her dignity, and her truth. The lie that had defined her marriage for years could no longer survive. And as he struggled to process the revelation, the stage was set for the final chapter, the ultimate reckoning where every deception would face the light, and the woman who had been called useless would emerge victorious, unshaken, and free. The moment of reckoning arrived not with a storm, but with a quiet, undeniable force. She stood in a space that had once been a prison of subtle abuse and accusation, now transformed into a theater of truth. The DNA test, the years of careful documentation, the observations she had meticulously gathered, all converged into a single powerful reality. She was no longer a participant in his narrative. She was the author of her own. He could no longer rely on charm, manipulation, or deflection. Each attempt to twist the facts faltered under the weight of irrefutable evidence. The lie that had given him control for so long shattered with the simple clarity of truth. She had spent years doubting herself, internalizing guilt that was never hers to bear, and yet here she was, steady and unflinching, holding the power he had thought he owned. In that moment she realized that revenge was not about anger. It was about reclamation. Every insult, every accusation, every quiet night spent feeling defective had been a tool in his arsenal. Now she reclaimed each one, transforming pain into authority, manipulation into proof of his deceit. The years he had relied on her submission became the very evidence that exposed him. The silence between them was heavy, thick with all the unspoken truths that had finally emerged. She did not need to raise her voice. Her calm carried more weight than any shout. The truth itself resonated louder than any words could. He stared, unprepared for the impact of consequences that had been carefully constructed over time. This was not a moment of chaos. It was precision, clarity, and undeniable justice. She revealed every detail she had recorded, showing how each accusation, each word, each moment of blame had been rooted in his desire to conceal the truth. He had accused her of inadequacy, of failure, of uselessness, all while hiding a secret that would unravel everything he had claimed about himself. The irony was sharp, cutting deeper than any confrontation ever could. And then as the final revelation hit, she saw it. The look of shock, disbelief, and fear. The man who had controlled her life through doubt and manipulation was now forced to confront reality he could no longer distort. He realized, in the starkest way possible, that his actions had consequences and that the woman he had demeaned for years had risen above every attempt to break her. She felt a quiet satisfaction, a calm she had not known in years. There was no gloating, no malice, only the deep, resonant sense of justice. For the first time in a long time she understood the power of truth held by someone who refuses to be diminished. She was free from the chains of manipulation, free from the constant questioning of her worth, free from the shadow of his lies. As she stepped back and observed the aftermath, the house itself seemed different, transformed. What had been a place of quiet tension and invisible control now bore witness to her reclamation. The narrative had shifted entirely. The years of emotional abuse could not be undone, but they no longer defined her. She had reclaimed her dignity, her voice, and her life. She also recognized that this was only the beginning. The freedom she had fought for would carry her forward, shaping her future with clarity and strength. No longer defined by someone else's lies, she could move with purpose, make choices unbound by guilt or manipulation, and build a life rooted in authenticity and self-respect. In the final moments, she allowed herself to reflect on the transformation. The journey had been long, painful, and filled with quiet battles. But it had also been necessary. Without the tests, without the years of observation, without the courage to hold the truth, she would not have arrived at this place of empowerment. She had emerged not just unbroken, but stronger than she had ever imagined. And as the story closed, she stood tall, a woman no longer shadowed by accusations or deceptions. The lie that had once controlled her marriage had been exposed, and she had not only survived, it had made her unstoppable. She was the Black Queen who had endured, who had discovered her power, and who had reclaimed her life. The final lesson was clear. The truth is a weapon more powerful than manipulation, patience is a shield stronger than anger, and no one can define your worth except yourself. In the face of betrayal and falsehood, strength, strategy, and self-belief can turn the tables, revealing not just the liar but the warrior who has always been inside. And so she walked forward, free, unshaken, and unbreakable, carrying a message for anyone who has been told they are useless. Your truth is your power, and no one can take that from you.